My parents sued me because I refused to hand over my new truck to my brother. They lost the case, got hit with my legal fees, and when my cameras caught my brother slashing my tires in revenge, I let the police teach him what deserve really means. My name is Simon, and for 32 years, that's how my family operated. They raised one prince, my brother Blake, and one pack mule, me. I was the reliable beast of burden, the one who worked, provided, and whose property was always considered family property, which always meant Blake's property. They never admitted it, but the rules were written in every silent expectation, every chore list, and every punishment. I was the heavy equipment mechanic, the crane tech, spending most of my life on remote job sites, the middle of nowhere smelling like diesel and wet earth. It was hard, thankless work, but every hour, every sweat-soaked paycheck was mine. That was the point. I had been stacking almost every dollar I earned for years, not for a house or a dream vacation, but for one simple, concrete thing that was untouchable. I bought the truck I had been planning for longer than I had planned anything in my personal life. It was a 2022 Chevy Silverado RST, dark blue with clean, uncompromising lines. I walked into the dealership, the smell of new leather and polished chrome, hitting me like a physical wave of achievement. Signed the papers with a hand that didn't shake, and drove it out. Every inch of that truck, every horsepower under the hood, was paid for by the hours I put in, the nights I spent sleeping in temporary housing, and the food I ate off a steel counter. It was mine, final and complete. The old car, a rattling sedan that smelled vaguely of dust and spilled coffee, was the work car. It was for the days I didn't want anything touching the Silverado. The Silverado was for me. The beater was for everything else. When I finally got a stretch of days off, I pointed the dark blue Silverado toward Tulsa. I rent a small duplex far enough from my parents' place to breathe, but close enough for the occasional mandated visit. Pulling into their familiar, slightly patchy driveway late that afternoon, the sunlight caught the paint, making the truck glow like a jewel that had no business being there. I hadn't even shut the engine off when the front door opened. Blake stepped out. He was 27, perpetually underemployed, dressed in a wrinkled hoodie and slides, his hair messy, like he had rolled out of bed at the crack of noon. His eyes went straight to the truck, locking on without blinking. He walked toward it, already wearing that specific grin, the one that meant he had mentally already claimed whatever he was looking at. "Oh damn," he purred. "Oh damn," he purred, circling the front fender. "So, when you letting me take it out?" There it was. The entitlement, pure and simple. Not congratulations, not admiration, just the immediate assumption of ownership, the same way he had always taken my baseball glove, my allowance or my piece. He circled the truck slowly, like he was doing an inspection he had authority for. I leaned against the driver's side door watching him. "Yeah, right after I hand you my PN number." He laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that assumed I was joking. He reached for the door handle, his fingers brushing the cool metal. I hit the lock with the remote before he could open it. He jerked his hand back, acting deeply offended. "Relax," he said. "I was just going to check out the inside. You can check it out from exactly where you're standing," I told him, making sure my tone was flat and dry, leaving zero room for interpretation. He blinked, confusion flickering in his eyes. It was the face of a person whose brain was short, circuiting because a fundamental lifelong rule had been broken. To Blake, my stuff was always just temporary storage until he felt ready to claim it. The Silverado was not going to be one of those things. Mom, Lisa Hayes, appeared on the porch, followed by Dad, Mark Hayes. Mom was already smiling too wide, doing her usual cheerleader routine for Blake. Dad followed, hands on his hips, scanning the truck from the stairs like he was judging its tactical value. Blake looked back at them, angling for backup, needing their confirmation for his big brother, shares everything act. "Looks expensive," Dad said, his voice flat, judging, not impressed. "Looks earned," I replied, not breaking eye contact. Blake shrugged, stepping beside me again, allowing the purchase. "Yeah, it's cool. You know, I'd look good in it, too." "Good thing you'll never find out," I said. The smirk finally wiped clean off his face for a full second. Then he switched to the fake laugh, the kind he used when he was banking the resentment for later. Blake didn't drop things. He stored them. Mom came down the steps and hugged me, talking too fast about how busy they had been. Dad kept staring at the truck like he was calculating how long it would be until it belonged to somebody else. I knew that look. It was the look that said, "How long until this belongs to your brother?" Blake stepped in close again, his voice dropping to a fake conspiratorial murmur. "Seriously though, you gotta let me drive it at least once. Like a christening or something." I gave him a half smirk that didn't reach my eyes. "Yeah. The day you pay one bill in my life." He didn't like that answer, but he didn't fight it. He simply pocketed the moment. As the sun went down, and they kept trying to joke their way into the driver's seat, that familiar pressure settled in. The same heavy expectation that always came with walking through this door. The expectation that I would fold the way they taught me to. But the difference now was simple. I wasn't 17 anymore. And I wasn't playing my assigned role ever again. The first boundary was set in the driveway, but the old weight of expectation settled in as soon as I walked through their door. Despite the initial refusal, the pressure I felt from my parents and Blake did not ease. It simply tightened, a cold wire around my chest, reminding me of the unspoken rules of the house where I grew up. I stayed in Tulsa for 2 more days, occupying my duplex, watching my family from a safe, cautious distance. I knew they were plotting. Blake didn't understand no, and my parents didn't understand mine. It was Lisa who eventually initiated the move. She sent a text saying she wanted a quiet family dinner to catch up. No agenda, no hint of the truck, just a request for a normal meal. I knew better. Normalcy was a weapon in their hands, deployed just before the real attack. But I went anyway. If nothing else, I wanted to see exactly how quickly they would drop the act. When I pulled up to their house, I made sure to park the Silverado not in the driveway, but on the street, directly under a flickering street lamp. I didn't want Blake circling it again, treating it like a museum exhibit he was waiting to claim. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocatingly pleasant. Blake was already seated, scrolling on his phone, looking up with a soft, practiced sigh. He had already mastered the wounded, fragile Prince expression, the kind that silently suggested he was constantly recovering from some injury that I had caused. Mom was too bright, too smiling, arranging plates around the table. Dad, Mark, stood behind her, arms crossed, sizing me up instead of greeting me, like he was preparing to issue orders on a parade field. Small talk lasted 30 seconds, maybe 45. They didn't genuinely care where my latest crane project was or how long I'd be off. They never did. Mark didn't waste time. He leaned back like a judge about to pass sentence. So, he started, his voice a low rumble. Your brother has been struggling with transportation. His car has been acting up. You know that. I glanced at Blake. His shoulders were slumped in perfect wounded Prince mode. He gave me a small, rehearsed sigh. You're doing well out there. Dad continued, ignoring me. Good money. Good hours. You can manage. He looked at me then, his eyes hard. It's time to help your brother. Mom's breath hitched. That was her cue. She didn't wait for my answer. She went straight into the tears. The weaponized disappointment. Blake just needs something reliable, Simon. He's had such a hard year. You know how sensitive he is. Blake kept his head down, hands folded on his lap like he was praying for deliverance. Perfect performance. Then Dad said it, clean and direct, making it sound obvious instead of insane. So, we think it's reasonable that you let him take the truck. I didn't blink. The simple word was a wall. No. Mom gasped, a high, sharp sound, like I'd slapped the table. Blake's head jerked up, the fragility momentarily forgotten. Dad stiffened, his authority challenged. I slowly set my fork down, hearing the soft click of ceramic on wood. I paid for it. I'm keeping it. Simple. Final. Mom wiped her eyes, already producing tears on command. Honey, please. We're talking about family. Blake needs a leg up. Blake nodded, adding a whisper-soft line. It's not forever. Just until I get things sorted. I shook my head. That truck is mine. End of story. Dad swapped to the voice he used when he thought respect was automatic, the ex-military bark. Don't be selfish. Simon, your brother needs help. You don't need that thing right now, not like he does. There's a difference between needing transportation, I said, looking right at him, and needing someone else's property. Blake shifted in his seat, trying to look as fragile as possible. Dad leaned in, his voice low but razor sharp. You think you're above this family now. You think because you have a paycheck, you get to talk down to us. I gave him the truth dead in the eye. No, but I'm not handing over a truck I earned, because you two can't say no to Blake. Dad's jaw clenched. He's your brother, Simon, right? Not my dependent, I answered. Mom lunged across the table like she could physically grab the decision out of the air. Simon, please for once do the right thing. There's nothing right about giving him my truck, I stated. Dad pushed back from the table, his fingers tapping a fast rhythm, debating whether to yell or lecture. Blake's face twisted in an unfamiliar expression. He wasn't used to me shutting things down without a negotiation. He muttered under his breath, You always think you're better than me. No, I said, standing up. I think I work harder than you. Big difference. Dad tried one last time, using his strongest voice. Watch how you speak in this house. You're forgetting your place. I gave him a small, cold smirk. My place is behind my own steering wheel. I walked toward the door. Dinner's over for me. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. When I got back to the duplex on the south side of Tulsa, the first thing I did was pull out the 2 small boxes I had ordered weeks ago and forgotten about. Driveway and door cameras. I had been meaning to install them, but never bothered. That night, I mounted them both, quick, precise, no hesitation. I didn't do it out of fear. I did it because I knew the pattern. When Blake didn't get what he wanted, he didn't let it go, and neither did my parents. The first boundary was set. Now I was preparing for the war. 2 days after the failed dinner, my cousin Riley Chen texted me. asking if I was coming to Grandma's birthday dinner at Aunt Denise's place. Riley wasn't one for drama, so I took it at face value. No one in my immediate family had mentioned it, but that wasn't unusual. They delivered information selectively. I showed up right on time, carrying a store, bought pie. The driveway was full, cars lining the curb. But the second I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The living room wasn't set up for a birthday. There was no cake, no decorations, no presents, just chairs arranged in a wide circle. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone was sitting stiffly, eyes already locked on me. Grandma wasn't even there. Aunt Denise cleared her throat, her voice practiced. Your grandma wasn't feeling up to coming tonight. I knew she wasn't. Then I saw Mark and Lisa standing near the back wall like the hosts of a daytime talk show, and Blake slumped in a chair off to the side, looking like he'd been injured in some tragic event. It wasn't a birthday dinner, it was an ambush, an intervention, staged by the people who had no right to judge me. Mom stepped forward, her voice soft and trembling. Simon, we're just here to talk as a family. Dad followed with a stern nod. Everyone is concerned about the situation. I took a slow, deep breath, my hands tightening around the pie box. I said loud enough for every silent, judgmental relative to hear. All right, let's hear it. Aunt Denise started, her tone rehearsed. We think your parents are just trying to support both of you. They're worried you're being unnecessarily harsh. Uncle Pat chimed in. Your brother is going through a tough time. He needs stability. A cousin I barely knew added. He just wants a fair shot. Every person spoke like they had practiced the lines, using the same phrases. Blame me. Excuse Blake. Mark finally took center. Your brother needs reliable transportation to get his life on track. You're financially secure, you can afford to share. Mom nodded, fighting back tears. We thought you'd understand if you heard it from family, not just us. Blake finally looked up, delivering the perfect quiet, perfectly pitched line. I'm not trying to take advantage, Si. I just need help. I scanned the room again, faces full of expectation. They were waiting for me to fold in front of an audience. That was the whole point. Pressure from every direction. Instead, I straightened my spine. If you're all here to beg for my truck, I said, my voice steady and clear, line up behind Blake. The answer is still no. Discrediting them publicly only made them swap the guilt trip for something heavier, the legal system. After I told the assembled relatives to line up behind Blake if they wanted to beg for my property, silence fell over Aunt Denise's living room. A couple of my cousins looked away, realizing they had been tricked into a hostile intervention. My cousin Riley Chen, sitting near the back, covered their mouth to hide a smile. You dragged half the family here to guilt me into giving away something I bought. I continued, my voice gaining heat. If you want to help Blake, go for it. Buy him a bus pass, a bike, another car. But my truck isn't on the table. Aunt Denise tried to salvage the situation. We're just trying to keep peace, Simon. Then stop staging interventions for a grown man who refuses to work. I said. That pushed a few people over the edge. My Uncle Ray stood up, clearing his throat awkwardly. Well, maybe this wasn't the best idea. Cousin Malign followed, looking genuinely shocked. Yeah. I didn't know it was about taking your truck. That wasn't how your mom explained it. Mom tried to reel them back in. He's twisting it. No twisting? I cut her off. You lied to get me here. You used Grandma as an excuse. I looked around the room one last time. And you wasted everyone's time. Dad's jaw clenched so hard the muscle twitched along the side. We're talking about family responsibility. I stepped toward the doorway. Responsibility doesn't mean surrendering my property, because Blake can't handle being an adult. No one tried another speech. Nobody blocked the exit. I walked out, got into my old beater sedan, and left the house without looking back. An hour later, Riley texted me. Just so you know, your parents planned that whole thing with Blake. They had talking points written out. A second message followed. Most of us didn't know what it was really about. They said you were acting unstable. Total lie. I thanked Riley, feeling a deep, cold satisfaction that my procedure of setting a boundary had held. The ambush hadn't convinced me to hand over anything. It just confirmed that if Blake wanted something, my parents would turn the entire family into tools to get it. The lawsuit arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered to my mailbox like a bad joke. It was a thick packet, formal and intimidating. My parents' names listed as the plaintiffs. The claims inside read like they had been written by someone who had never been told the word no a day in their life. They claimed there was a family understanding. They claimed the truck was intended for Blake. They claimed I was wrongfully withholding property promised to my younger brother. It was a completely rewritten version of reality, where I existed purely as Blake's storage unit. I skimmed the pages, flipped to the signatures, and saw Mark and Lisa had both signed the document. Blake's name wasn't on anything. He wasn't dumb enough to put his own signature on a lie. He let them do the heavy lifting while he hid behind his usual victim routine. I didn't feel shock or anger. They had tried guilt. They had tried an ambush. And now they were trying a legal attack. They were just leveling up the same demand. My emotional response was validation. My instinct to install the cameras had been correct. They really were willing to do anything. I called Carter Nguyen, a lawyer one of my co-workers had sworn by. Carter was mid-30s with a sharp, pragmatic voice and an immediate grasp of the facts. After hearing my story, his first sentence was, "They're out of their minds, but paperwork makes idiots bold. Send me everything." I did. Carter filed a formal response, and discovery began. Over the next few weeks, the back and forth warmed up. That's when things got entertaining. My parents had no proof of anything. Not one text, not one email, not one written message showing any agreement whatsoever, because there wasn't one. Their entire case sat on understood expectations, which, as Carter pointed out, is not a legal argument. It is a family excuse. They're fishing for something that doesn't exist. Carter told me over the phone. Let them waste their energy. Meanwhile, the cousin leak kicked in again. Riley sent me a folder of screenshots from the group chat my parents and Blake had used to orchestrate the ambush. The messages were time-stamped, clear, and embarrassing. They drafted talking points, listed which relatives should say what, and even practiced sympathy lines for Blake. Then Riley forwarded the messages Blake had sent privately to a couple of his sympathetic cousins. The words were a goldmine. "I'm calling dibs on Simon's truck. He'll fold. Mom and Dad are going to make him do the right thing. He's got money. He doesn't need it." This was hard evidence of entitlement. Hard evidence of planning. Hard evidence that the lawsuit wasn't about fairness, principles, or necessity. It was about Blake deciding he deserved something and expecting the family structure to deliver it. Carter added it all to the discovery packet with a smile I could hear over the phone. "This is over already, Simon." My initial feeling of being cornered by their legal attack melted away, replaced by a cold, steady confidence. My faith in procedural justice deepened. I was fighting their emotion and their authority with facts and evidence, and in a court of law, facts always win. I was no longer the pack mule defending his scraps. I was the methodical opponent dismantling their whole house of cards, and it felt right. With the evidence stacked against them, all that remained was the performance under oath. A few weeks after Carter and Nguyen had finalized the discovery packet, the depositions began. This was where the raw, emotional theater of my family would clash with the cold, unforgiving structure of the law. I watched the process unfold, seated across the table, maintaining a distance that felt both physical and emotional. Blake went first. He arrived dressed like he was auditioning for a commercial about hardship, an oversized, wrinkled sweater, messy hair, and visible dark circles under his eyes that I suspected he might have enhanced for dramatic effect. He sat down, sighed dramatically, and began every answer with a practiced lament, something like, "I'm trying my best," or, "This has been so hard on me." When Carter asked him what evidence he possessed of the so-called family understanding regarding the truck, Blake blinked hard, queuing up tears. "It wasn't written," he whispered, leaning into the microphone. "It was emotional. We all just knew. Mom and Dad always said they'd make things fair for me. Simon knows that." I sat across the table watching the performance like a critic at a bad, predictable play. The tears slid down his cheek, but they never quite reached his collar. His breathing was off beat, his gestures too wide, too rehearsed. He was trying to sell the role of the wounded, deprived prince one last time. "So you have no documentation, Mr. Hayes?" Carter asked, his voice even, entirely lacking emotion. Blake stammered, "Simon's always been the strong one. I'm the sensitive one." Carter didn't react to the deflection. He simply slid a printed screenshot across the table to Blake. "Is this your message sent to your cousin Riley Chen?" Blake looked down. The words were unmistakable, stark against the white paper. "I'm calling dibs on Simon's truck." Blake froze, his lips parting, the fragility immediately cracking. He stammered, "Fat, that was a joke, out of context." "Understood," Carter said smoothly, refusing to concede the point. "And this one?" He slid the next screenshot over. "Mom and Dad are going to make him do the right thing." Blake wiped at a tear that didn't exist. "Context matters. We were frustrated." Carter didn't let him finish. He slid over the third and final message. "He'll fold." The room went silent. Even the court reporter paused her typing for half a second. Blake's act fully collapsed. The tears stopped. His jaw tightened, the entitlement twisting his features into something hard and ugly. That was the real Blake, cornered, entitled, and furious that his manipulation had been so expertly exposed. Next came my parents. Mark tried authority first, leaning forward, talking like he was giving a motivational speech on family principles and my obligation as the older son. He spoke of unwritten rules, loyalty, and duty. Carter let him talk until he finally ran out of breath. Then, Carter asked the only question that mattered. "Mr. Hayes, do you have any written evidence of this alleged agreement or obligation, beyond your personal interpretation of family principles?" Mark stiffened. "It wasn't written. It was understood." Carter nodded slowly, making the silence that followed feel heavy with implication. "Understood by whom, specifically?" Mark's ensuing silence was his perfect, damning answer. He simply couldn't force the lie. Mom tried tears and guilt. She insisted Blake needed a fresh start and that the truck represented balance in the family. She kept looking at me, her eyes pleading, trying to pierce my composure and make me betray myself by sitting still. She was furious that I wasn't weeping in shame. Carter asked her two simple, factual questions. Mrs. Hayes, did you or your husband ever give Simon any money, loans, or promises regarding the purchase of this specific truck? No, she whispered, defeated. And did Simon ever tell you he planned to give the truck to Blake? No, she whispered again, her tears finally drying up. By the time my deposition came, their case had already crumbled into dust. I answered Carter's questions plainly, focusing only on the technical facts: when I bought the truck, how I paid for it, why I kept a second car, and the specifics of my parents' demands. There were no theatrics, no emotion, and no speeches, just cold, hard facts. I told the truth simply because the truth was what mattered. When it wrapped, Carter gathered his folders, looked at me, and confirmed the emotional truth I had suspected for weeks. They have nothing, Simon. And now we have everything. The depositions had stripped away the lies. The court date was merely the final stage of accountability. A few weeks after the paperwork was finalized and the evidence secured, the courthouse was packed tighter than it needed to be. I sat beside Carter and Guyan, calm, ready, and internally utterly bored by the predictability of the situation. Across the room, Mark and Lisa sat stiff, backed and polished, looking like they were posing for a church directory photo, trying to project wounded dignity. Blake sat between them in the same helpless posture he had perfected since childhood, shoulders slumped, hands folded, lips pressed in a permanent pout. He looked like a child waiting for a lollipop, not a grown man in a court of law. When the case was called, Blake launched straight into his final performance. He spoke about his hard year, his mental strain, his need for stability, and how the truck represented the family support I was obligated to provide. He dropped lines he had rehearsed, complete with slow, tearful pauses, trying to appeal to the emotional side of the court. My parents backed him up with wide, innocent eyes. Lisa dabbed her eyelids every few minutes, the tears barely there, mostly performance. Mark tried to play the reasonable father, talking about family expectations and promises understood between brothers. He refused to look at me once, not even when he explained my supposed duty as the older son. He spoke as if I were a piece of equipment that had failed to follow his operational orders. Carter took his turn. He did not yell. He did not appeal to emotion. He simply dismantled their argument piece by piece, using their own words. He spoke of the complete absence of any written agreement, any loan or any financial contribution from the plaintiffs toward the vehicle. Then, he presented the screenshots, the group chat planning the ambush, the messages about calling dibs on my property, and the strategy of emotional guilt manipulation. The judge, a silver-haired man with an air of profound wariness, read each page slowly. He spent a long time examining the message, heel fold, looking up only once to cast a critical gaze across the table at Blake, who visibly flinched. Blake tried to interrupt twice, his voice rising in panicked protest. Both times, the judge shut him down with a sharp, procedural reprimand that deflated his dramatic effort. When Carter finished, the judge leaned back and let the silence stretch, the weight of their exposed manipulation hanging in the air. Then, he delivered the ruling in clean, sharp, precise sentences. The court finds no evidence whatsoever to support the plaintiff's claim of an agreement or obligation regarding the asset in question, a motor vehicle purchased solely by the defendant, Simon Hayes. He paused, looking directly at my parents. The core of this claim rests entirely on the plaintiff's expectation of entitlement and a rewriting of the facts, which the discovery process has laid bare. Then came the final sweet, absolute pronouncement. Case dismissed with prejudice. He brought his gavel down, the sound echoing through the room like the final word on the matter. Plaintiffs are ordered to cover the defendant's legal costs and attorney's fees. Blake's face collapsed immediately. It was the face of a child who realized Santa Claus not only wasn't real, but was going to cost him money. Lisa gasped, a raw, uncontrolled sound. Mark's jaw twitched violently, as if he were chewing nails, his lifetime of authority crumbling into financial debt. I thanked the judge, shook Carter's hand, and walked out of the courtroom feeling exactly how I expected to feel: steady. The outcome had never been in doubt. The triumph was not one of excitement or glee, but one of validation. The highest external authority had validated my lifelong struggle, confirming that the family's narrative was based on coercive lies. It was a profound liberation. The phrase, dismissed with prejudice, resonated in my mind. It meant they could never bring this specific claim back. The civil conflict was fully resolved. The cost, both financial and emotional, was squarely placed on the architects of the conflict. I felt the deepest sense of calm objectivity I had ever known. I was finally free of the expectation that I had to perform the role they assigned me. I drove back to my duplex, parking the Silverado in its usual spot. I barely had time to shut the truck door before I heard footsteps behind me. Mark. He had come across the driveway with the straight line march he used to use when he was about to bark orders on the parade field. He stopped about 3 feet away, His eyes locked on the keys in my hand. He looked like an animal that had just lost its prey. "You think this is over?" he asked, his voice low and shaking with controlled fury. That judge didn't fix anything. I didn't answer. I didn't move. He stepped closer, his hand darting toward my pocket, a desperate final attempt to just take the keys, the way a parent snatches a toy from a difficult toddler. His fingers brushed the edge of my jeans. I caught his wrist before he could close his hand, my grip sudden and firm. "Try that again," I said, my voice low and quiet, but carrying the weight of the judge's ruling. "And you will not like what follows." His eyes flicked up to meet mine, confused for half a second, the realization settling in. He pulled his hand back fast, like he had touched a live wire. Whatever version of me he thought he could intimidate, control, or physically overpower didn't exist anymore. He stared, then took a step back, shaking his head. "You're a disappointment," he spat out. "Get in line," I answered. He walked off toward their car, where Lisa was calling his name, her voice shaky. Blake was in the passenger seat, watching from behind the window, craning his neck to get a last look at the truck. They drove away, and I pocketed the keys, the scent of the new leather and chrome smelling like victory. The legal battle was done, but I knew the pattern of entitlement never stops until it hits a wall it can't climb. Legal defeat should have been the end, but I knew the pattern of entitlement never stops until it hits a wall it can't climb. The confrontation with Mark, where I physically halted his reach for the keys, had been a decisive, necessary act of self-preservation. It was the moment I erased the last remnants of the fearful boy he had raised, but it was also the signpost for the next, lower form of attack. 3 days after the court ruling and the tense confrontation, I was doing a routine inspection of the Silverado. It was habit, born from years of working with complex machinery. Check the seals, check the connections, check for anything out of place. I crouched under the front end of the truck, running my hand along the frame near the wheel well. When my fingers brushed against a clean slice, I pulled back and looked closely. The wheel speed sensor lead in the front harness had been cut. It wasn't frayed or worn down. It was a straight, deliberate incision made by a sharp, thin blade. The cut was precise, placed exactly where it wouldn't be easily noticed during a casual walk around. It wouldn't have killed the truck instantly, but it would have killed the anti-lock braking system, and depending on the speed, could have stranded me somewhere inconvenient. Maybe the highway, maybe a job site hours from town. It was sabotage, plain and simple and highly personal. I felt no surge of anger, only a cold, validating determination. They hadn't tried to take the whole truck this time. They just wanted to injure it, to inconvenience me, to send a message that the conflict was still ongoing. I immediately took out my phone and documented the damage with pictures from every angle. Then I went inside and pulled up the camera feed from the system I'd installed weeks ago. I fast-forwarded through the last few nights, watching the empty driveway footage. Blake never appeared on camera. Neither did my parents. Whoever did it came up the narrow side, yard path along the fence, the one angle my initial setup did not cover. I had covered the front walk and the alley approach, but that cut through by the trash cans was a blind spot. They had watched the cameras. They had learned the weakness of my defense. Instead of swearing or ranting, I simply assessed the tactical failure. They had found the soft spot. I fixed it. I spent the rest of the evening redoing the entire surveillance setup. I drove to the store and bought 2 more high-definition cameras, new mounts, and more wiring. I worked until well after dark, mounting the new cameras higher, adjusting angles, and ensuring additional coverage over the whole driveway and both sides of the duplex. No gaps, no blind corners, no way for anyone to approach the truck without showing up on a lens. I wired an automatic backup system, ensuring the footage was immediately saved to an external drive and synced to the cloud. When I was done, I wiped my hands clean of dust and wiring debris. I sat on the couch, watching the multiple live feeds cycling across my monitor. I was waiting, because the pattern was obvious and absolute. When Blake didn't get what he wanted, he escalated to criminal mischief. When my parents didn't get what they wanted, they pushed harder, and nothing about the past week suggested they were done. I had presented them with the final authority of the law, and they had rejected it. They would try again. The deliberate nature of the attack, the cold calculation behind cutting the sensor lead, heightened my sense of operational vigilance. This was no longer an emotional fight over a vehicle. It was a war of attrition waged against my autonomy. The legal victory had cost them money, but my subsequent physical refusal to yield the keys had cost them their authority over me. The next step was pure, reckless vengeance. I felt a profound sense of isolation, but it was an isolation I embraced. In this self-imposed solitude, relying only on my own vigilance and procedure, I was finally truly free. I knew the physical damage they were capable of, and I was prepared to document their final fatal error. The emotional arc was complete. I was fully self-reliant, defending my worth with technology and procedure, transforming from the victim of their expectations into the unyielding enforcer of my own peace. The trap was set. All that was left was the predictable timing of desperate malice. The legal loss and my rejection of my father's physical reach had stripped away every layer of control they had over me. They had nothing left but petty vengeance, and I was waiting for it. The morning it happened, the air was cold enough to fog my breath as soon as I stepped outside. I locked the front door, coffee in one hand, work bag in the other. Same routine, same time, same quiet duplex driveway. Then I saw the Silverado. All four tires were collapsed, flattened to the rims. They weren't simply deflated, but violently slashed. Straight, deliberate, gaping cuts, tearing through the heavy-duty rubber. Whoever did it used a sharp blade and had done it with confidence, without rushing. I stood still, taking in the angles of the damage, the way the dark rubber peeled outward. This was not random vandalism. It was a message, and it was the final, pathetic escalation. I turned around, went back inside, set the coffee down, and pulled up the upgraded camera feed. I fast-forwarded through the night until the motion detection alarm kicked in on the new side yard camera. There he was, Blake. Clear as daylight, hood down, face uncovered. He came in from the side yard path I had just covered, stepped into the driveway with a utility knife in his right hand, crouched down, and slashed the front tire in one quick, brutal motion. There was no hesitation. Then the next, then the next. He paused only once to switch the knife to his other hand and wipe the blade on his sleeve before moving to the last tire. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't even checking his surroundings. He did it like he believed the world was his, and I was still in the role they raised me for. The one who would silently absorb the damage and fix it later. He finished the job, looked at the truck like he had accomplished something meaningful, and walked away without looking back at the cameras. I saved the footage. Then I saved it again to an external hard drive, and then I emailed a copy to myself. 3 versions, no chance of accidental deletion. I grabbed the keys for the rattling beater sedan, backed out, and drove straight to the Tulsa police station. Inside, I explained the situation to the desk officer. He asked for proof. I handed him the USB drive. He clicked play. Blake appeared on the screen, slashing tire after tire with the enthusiasm of someone who finally believed he was owed something. The officer's eyebrows went up high above his glasses. "Well, that's clear," he murmured. "Crystal," I confirmed. He called another officer over who watched the footage once and nodded. "Yeah, we'll open a case. Vandalism and criminal mischief. Someone will reach out soon." I signed the papers, provided my contact information, and walked out, feeling a profound stillness. No emotion, no drama, just procedure. Justice was no longer my responsibility, but the laws, feeling a profound stillness, no emotion, no drama, just procedure. Justice was no longer my responsibility, but the laws. By the time I got home, Mark and Lisa's car was already parked crooked in my driveway, like they had rushed over the second Blake realized the police had been notified. They were standing on my porch when I walked up. Lisa started first, her voice overly bright and forced. "Simon, honey, we heard something happened. We came to help." Mark nodded, trying to wear a calm expression he did not own. "We want to make this right. Tires aren't cheap. Let us cover it." I walked past them and unlocked the door. Lisa stepped toward me, desperate. "We can fix this as a family," Mark added, trying to frame the deal. "And Blake can take the truck on weekends just until he gets settled. That way everyone wins." There it was. The trade. The strings attached. The fake peace offering that was really just another attempt to get what they had wanted from the beginning. The key to the Silverado and control over my life. I turned to face them, my voice flat, holding no trace of negotiation. "You're not buying weekends with my property. That game is dead." Lisa's smile cracked instantly. Mark's face tightened. Before either of them could respond, Blake came around the corner of the house. He must have been listening the whole time, boiling with fury. His expression flipped between shock and fury, realizing the plan had failed and I wasn't bending. "You called the cops on me," he snapped, the wounded Prince act abandoned completely. "You slashed my tires," I said, simply stating the fact. "What did you think was going to happen?" He stepped forward, his hands shaking. "You're seriously doing this over a truck? Over my property being vandalized by a grown man who should know better?" Lisa rushed to Blake's side like he had been stabbed. "He's upset. He wasn't thinking clearly." Mark jabbed a finger toward me. "This doesn't have to go further. Withdraw the report. We'll handle it in the family." "It's already filed," I said. "And it's staying filed." Blake's jaw tightened. His eyes went sharp with the cold fear of real consequence. "You're ruining my life!" he yelled. "No," I replied. "You're ruining your own." He glared at me with a mix of humiliation and panic. He wasn't used to consequences approaching from the front door. I looked at the 3 of them, perfectly aligned against me, and realized the emotional turmoil had finally ceased. I was simply executing a procedure I had set in motion long ago. My parents sued me because I refused to hand over my new truck to my brother. They lost the case, got hit with my legal fees, and when my cameras caught my brother slashing my tires in revenge, I let the police teach him what deserve really means. This final act of procedure, the police report, was the culmination of my arc. I had embraced consequences and procedural justice, not revenge, and in doing so, I had finally created the separation I needed. They didn't say goodbye when they left. They just got in the car, slammed the doors, and peeled out like teenagers caught shoplifting. I knew the fight was over. I had given them their attention, the kind that came with a case number. After my parents and Blake drove away in a fury, the calls started. Blake first. He called repeatedly, dozens of times. The voicemails were a roller coaster, crying, rambling, begging for me to call the police and say it was a misunderstanding, then yelling, insulting, and threatening, and finally dissolving back into tears. I didn't answer a single one. I let the voicemail fill up until it stopped accepting messages. When the last call came in, I picked up just long enough to deliver one line, my voice calm and devoid of feeling. You wanted my attention. Congratulations. You got the kind that comes with a case number. Then I hung up. On the drive back from the police station, I called the shop that outfits our site trucks. They had a matching set of 4 new tires in stock and held them for me. I swung by in the beater, loaded the rubber into the back, and headed home. By evening, I had the tires replaced one by one with a torque wrench, my mind quiet and focused only on the mechanics of the task. After that, I went inside and upgraded the cameras one last time. 2 more angles, tighter coverage, better infrared, and automatic backups to cloud and external drives. When the system rebooted, I scrolled through the settings, checked every feed, and clicked save. Then, I opened my phone and blocked all 3 numbers. Mark, Lisa, and Blake. Calls, texts, everything. Gone. The next morning, I took the final paperwork and drove to the courthouse, not to sue, but to file for a no-contact order. Clean, simple, legal final. By the time I returned home and stepped out into the driveway, the air was quiet. The Silverado sat on 4 new tires, cameras pointed from every angle, the damage of the morning replaced with cold, physical clarity. I stood there for a moment, not to admire the truck, but to acknowledge something simple. They didn't just lose a truck fight. They lost the right to reach into my life ever again, and this time they understood it. I had embraced the painful vulnerability of severing ties, and in doing so, I had secured an unconditional ownership of my future. I was finally truly autonomous.